While Hollywood has us believing every Roman died in battle, the truth is way grosser and way more relatable. Ancient Rome wasn't undone by gladiator fights or epic war campaigns. Instead, it was taken down by its toilets, bathhouses, and whatever was floating in the Tiber River. So grab your hand sanitizer, because today we are going to dive deep into what killed the most people in ancient Rome. Even if Romans were pretty good at dying in wars fought on their borders, they had no clue about the problems they had back home. It should not come as a surprise to us, modern-day observers who enjoy the privilege of soap and clean water, that the lack of sanitation was a major issue in ancient Rome. But what made it deadly? Everyone knows of the famous Roman toilets. They were much like the social media of the ancient world, full of crap, open to the public, and you were always vaguely uncomfortable using them. These latrinae were marvels of infrastructure, connected to sophisticated sewer systems like the Cloaca Maxima, more on that later, which sounds like a spell Harry Potter would use to unclog a drain. And yet, they stank. Really stank. Despite being connected to flowing water, many toilets sat atop cesspits that festered with all kinds of bad things. Famously, of course, Romans didn't use toilet paper. No, they shared a communal sponge called a tersorium, soaked in vinegar or salt water and reused endlessly. And none of it was sanitary. It's like wiping with a damp loofah of doom and then putting it back for the next person like some twisted version of the office coffee spoon. But here's the wild part. Romans were proud of their sanitation system. And in fairness, compared to what came before, they'd made major progress. Public toilets were free, plentiful, and often located near bathhouses, which served as both hygiene centers and gossip hubs. The baths were so central to Roman life that emperors would build lavish complexes just to keep the plebs happy and squeaky clean. Still, cleanliness had its limits. Water flowed, yes, but it often flowed backward. During floods, sewers could reverse, sending fetid water and gas shooting back into homes and public latrines. That's right, Roman toilets could literally explode with methane gas. And that's just the beginning. Because if you think bad plumbing is the worst thing the Romans had to deal with, wait until we talk about their disease portfolio, which makes modern WebMD searches look like light reading. What made Roman public toilets and baths possible was the sophisticated sewer system. The Cloaca Maxima, literally the greatest sewer, was not just a fun name to shout in a Roman accent. It was one of the most impressive pieces of infrastructure in the ancient world. Imagine a giant underground tunnel designed to flush the waste of an entire civilization. Built as early as the 6th century BCE, yes, while the rest of Europe was still figuring out fire and footwear, the Cloaca Maxima was designed to drain stormwater, swamp muck, and human waste straight into the Tiber River. And boy, did it do its job. It was the unsung hero of Roman hygiene, the subterranean MVP keeping the city from turning into a giant open-air cesspool. Now, we're not saying it was a 5-star experience. It had an eternally ripe smell, and it made a very uncomfortable sound. If you were lucky enough to live near it, you could enjoy the soft ambiance of flushing filth with your morning bread and olives. But here's the thing. It worked. It really worked. The fact that this sewer is still partially functional today is both amazing and mildly horrifying. You'd think 2,500 years of wear and tear, earthquakes, emperors, and probably a few gladiator swords wouldn't be kind to a pipe system, but the Romans built it to last. They used stone, concrete, and sheer overachievement to create a sewage system that makes modern cities look like they were built by raccoons with budget cuts. At this point, you should have figured out the irony. The Cloaca Maxima may have carried waste out of the city, but it also dumped it straight into the Tiber, which was also used for drinking water. So while Rome had better plumbing than most of Europe for centuries, it also gave everyone a free sample of what was flushed just upstream. And then there was lead poisoning, which is what happens when you build your entire plumbing system out of lead pipes and then drink from it every day while bragging about how advanced your civilization is. Romans called lead plumbum, which is where we get the word plumber. So yes, the very people who gave us plumbing also slowly poisoned themselves with it. Irony tastes like metal. Still, for all its flaws, the Cloaca Maxima showed us something remarkable. Romans understood that a city couldn't thrive without proper sanitation. They saw waste not just as a problem, but as a puzzle to solve. And solve it they did, through raw engineering, civic ambition, and possibly the world's first public works complaint department. And these were just the beginning of Rome's health hazards. Because if you thought what we discussed so far were rough, wait till you hear about the plagues that really brought the empire to its knees. While the lack of sanitation was something that killed tens of thousands of Roman each year, it was only one part of the whole problem. Because if there were an award for the most unwanted occurrence in ancient Rome, it would go to disease. And not just any disease, but the empire-crushing, panic-inducing, apocalyptic plagues that showed up like clockwork to crash the civilization's vibe. Forget invading barbarians. Rome was brought to its knees, not by sword, but by sneeze. Let's start with the Antonine Plague, which arrived in 165 CE like a biological grenade tossed by the gods. It likely hitched a ride with Roman troops returning from the east. Within a few years, it had spread across the empire, wiping out around 5 million people, including Emperor Marcus Aurelius himself. Yes, the philosopher king who now mostly lives on your co-worker's desk in quote-of-the-day calendars. We're not totally sure what the Antonine Plague was. Smallpox is a strong candidate, but the symptoms read like a horror novel. Fever, diarrhea, ulcers on the skin, and people dropping dead fast. Whole cities were emptied. Armies couldn't recruit. Trade shriveled. But Rome wasn't done. In the 3rd century, enter stage left. The Plague of Cyprian, named after a bishop who, bless his heart, tried to interpret the mass death as a spiritual wake-up call. "This isn't the end," he wrote. "It's just a reminder that life is temporary." Easy to say when your spleen isn't exploding. This plague lasted almost 20 years, killing thousands daily at its peak. Bodies piled in the streets, inducing panic in the empire's citizens. Even worse, the Plague of Cyprian didn't just murder your neighbors, it also gutted the Roman agriculture. Fields went untended. Livestock wandered off like they had better things to do. People began to suspect that Rome had lost its divine favor, and many abandoned their gods in favor of newer, more plague-resistant religions. Hello, Christianity. But the ultimate plague flex came in the 6th century with the Plague of Justinian. Yes, technically we're in the Byzantine period now, but let's be honest. This was just Eastern Rome with sassier mosaics. Around 541 CE, this monster showed up in Constantinople and kept coming back for the next 2 centuries. Historians estimate that it killed between 25 to 50 million people across the Mediterranean world. Unlike earlier mystery bugs, the Plague of Justinian was likely a bubonic plague. Yes, the same Yersinia pestis that would later cause the Black Death. People reportedly dropped dead mid-sentence. Ships floated into harbors with dead crews. Emperor Justinian himself caught it, but survived. I guess he got immunity because the plague was named after him. What made these plagues so catastrophic wasn't just the disease, it was the context. Rome had dense cities, poor medical knowledge, and mass movement of troops and trade. Basically, they had all the ingredients for a pandemic lasagna, and it kept getting reheated every century or so. By the time the final waves receded, Rome wasn't so much falling as rotting from the inside out. A slow, oozing collapse powered not by enemies at the gates, but by microscopic assassins wearing no armor at all. However, not every Roman died dramatically in a plague. Most just spent their lives battling a never-ending carousel of illnesses that made every day feel like a wellness retreat in the underworld. You didn't need a pandemic to suffer in ancient Rome. All it took was drinking the water, breathing the air, or stepping outside during malaria season, which, inconveniently, was every season. Let's start with something familiar: gastrointestinal horror shows. Ancient Rome's sewage system may have been an architectural marvel, but it didn't stop the average Roman from guzzling down water laced with fecal bacteria, parasites, and whatever their neighbor upstream was contributing. The result? A regular schedule of stomach cramps, vomiting, and diarrhea that turned public latrines into community trauma centers. Forget coffee breaks. Romans probably bonded over who had the least horrifying bowel movement that week. Then there was malaria, which hit Rome like a recurring software bug. Unavoidable, deeply frustrating, and no one knew how to fix it. It was a public health nightmare that wasn't solved with aqueducts or vinegar sponges. Yes, the empire might have had roads, concrete, and a senate that sort of functioned, but it couldn't get rid of mosquitoes. Rome's countryside, especially the swampy zones around the Tiber and Campania, was the perfect five-star resort for Anopheles mosquitoes, who, as it turns out, were the deadliest in ancient Italy. Romans didn't know about bacteria or viruses, but they had a solid suspicion that something was off with bad smells and foul air. They called it miasma, or bad air, and blamed it for everything from headaches to plagues. The word malaria literally means bad air in Latin. Its symptoms included chills, fever, and praying to every god in the pantheon that you didn't start hallucinating about talking goats. The rich Romans fled the cities in summer to avoid the air, while poor folks, aka the majority, just stayed put and hoped they wouldn't die. Temples were built to appease fever gods like Febris, the divine embodiment of, I think I'm coming down with something. That's right, the Romans did worship a god of fevers, because when your healthcare plan consists of wine, prayer, and leeches, you might as well appeal to the divine. Malaria wasn't just a seasonal nuisance, it was a chronic plague that slowly ate away at the population. It weakened legions, devastated agricultural labor, and contributed to Rome's long, slow decline. In fact, some historians argue that malaria helped hollow out the empire from within, like termites in a marble column. And don't get us started on tuberculosis, which quietly stalked Romans like a patient serial killer. TB could be chronic, creeping through lungs for months, slowly suffocating its victims. Archaeologists have found signs of it in Roman skeletons, scarred ribs, and collapsed vertebrae, telling a silent story of slow, painful decline. Now, you may be wondering, surely they had doctors, right? Oh yes. Enter the Roman medicus, armed with knowledge passed down from Hippocrates, some sharp bronze tools, and an ego bigger than the Colosseum. Medicine in ancient Rome was a chaotic blend of half science, half magic, and half guesswork. Yes, that's too many halves, but so were their diagnosis methods. Take bloodletting, the Roman cure-all. Romans would resort to draining blood as a response to fevers, broken arms, and painful headaches. Romans believed health was all about balancing humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If that sounds made up, that's because it absolutely was. But hey, it gave doctors a solid excuse to stab people with dignity. They also loved herbal remedies like fennel for digestion or poppy for pain. Some of these actually worked. Poppy, after all, contains opiates, but others were pure trial and error. Cow dung was believed to treat a sore throat, and skin diseases, like acne, were believed to be remedied by bathing in crocodile urine, which was a bit tricky given Rome's distinct shortage of crocodiles. And while Greek physicians like Galen tried to bring logic and anatomy into medicine, most Roman healthcare resembled a terrifying game of would you rather? Would you rather let the fever run its course, or have a guy in a tunic rub vinegar and crush snails on your chest while muttering about lunar phases? Still, we've got to hand it to them. They were trying. With no germ theory, no microscopes, and gods for everything from door hinges to diarrhea, Romans did their best to keep people alive long enough to pay their taxes. Their medicine wasn't modern, but it was deeply human, messy, hopeful, and just a little gross. So, what really killed the most people in ancient Rome? Not war, not gladiators, not even the occasional angry elephant in the Colosseum. It was poop, plague, and questionable medical advice. That's how the greatest empire in the world wasn't brought down by external enemies. It rotted from the inside, one shared sponge and feverish bathhouse at a time. Because Rome's greatest enemy wasn't the barbarians, it was bacteria. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more engaging history content.